Hello everyone, my name is Josh and this is Whimsical and Interesting Musings. This is the show where I basically bring you whimsical and interesting musings every day, all year round. And today I'm going to be giving you a book review on one of my favourite authors, Stephen King. More specifically, The Shining, or Le Shining as the French would say. And I definitely do think that this is an interesting book because both with Stephen King's books is the actual phrasing is if you haven't read one of his books, chances are you've seen one of his movies. And the film adaptation of The Shining is probably one of the most well-renowned horror films in recent memory. A lot of the film is very iconic, with the twin girls in the hallway holding hands, saying "Come play with us, Danny," and things like that, and the guy in the tuxedo, the suit, holding a brandy with a great big axe gash across his face, saying "Lovely party" as blood squirts out of his face, stuff like that, and of course the rotting and decaying woman in the bathtub in the room 217, 317, I think it's called. I think it's called 317 in the film, and it's called 217 in the book, or 215. But yeah, the film is just iconic, and of course Stanley Kubrick really does bring his own flavour of Disturbia in this particular film. But it differs greatly from the original book, and the original book is more a family drama that focuses on things like regret, how one processes trauma in childhood, coupled with the struggles with addiction. In fact, a lot of Stephen King's novels I found in my reading through of them, especially his classic ones like The Shining, Misery, Christine, and even a little bit of In Pet Sematary, there's always this degree of he understands how the addictive mind works, and he understands how even though it's something that you can't control, there is that little part of you that really does want to do something, really wants you to, give in to your more deeper, darker urges. But there's also a part of the characters' minds that says they can't help it. It's like they're being controlled by some outside force. It's not always easy to break off these things. And it's a very human portrayal of addiction, because usually when people portray addiction, they always portray it in a very after school special kind of sense. Like, oh, this character's drinking alcohol and he's taking drugs. He's going to go down a spiral, and we're just going to watch him go from being a very fine, upstanding citizen to being a guy who has messy hair, dresses in rags, has torn clothes, and is literally got twitchy eyes or something like that. Like very cartoon depictions of the worst case scenario of a downward spiral. But what's very interesting about the way Stephen King does it is he still kind of considers the people who go through these addictions still as people, which I really like. And it really goes to show that he is a very intelligent writer, and in fact he's more intelligent than a lot of people give him credit for. And that's something that I really just love about Stephen King, as not just as a writer but as a person, is he just gets people, he gets how people tick. And let's crack on with the talking of this book. So the book, for those of you who don't know, and if you don't know, I'm going to give you a quick summary. A three-person family, a husband, a wife, and a child by the name of Jack Torrance, Wendy Torrance, and Danny Torrance, are going through a rough patch, and they need a particular source of income. So Jack Torrance decides to take the winter caretaker job at the Overlook Hotel for the winter, and he decides to bring his family up with him because he can't go back and forth because of the snowstorm. And while they're at the hotel, while they're settling in, a lot of weird things start to happen, including the fire hose pipe comes off the wall and starts to slither like a snake. The hedge animals in the hedge maze start to come to life and start to move and do other things. There's also a scene where a ghost is apparently haunting and harassing Danny in the anonymous room of 217. And this particular story does differ greatly from the original book. Like I said, a lot more of the set pieces are a little bit more disturbing, but there are some scenes where it is lifted directly from the book. Like, say, for example, in the film adaptation of The Shining, there's the scene. There's a scene where Jack Torrance has a particular tray of food slurped down his shirt, and or I think it's a champagne glass. He basically spills champagne. A waiter spills champagne glass. And he says, "Oh, please, let's get that cleaned up for you," when he's having one of his hallucinations. And this guy takes him into the bathroom, and he gets some water, and he basically starts to scrub the stain clean. And he goes, "Oh, nice work there, fella. What's your name?" And he goes, "Delbert, sir, Delbert Grady." And he goes, "You have children, Delbert?" And he goes, "I have 2 daughters, sir." And he goes, "Oh, so you're the caretaker." And there's that really great scene where Jack Nicholson basically says, in his very Jack Nicholson way, he starts to explain that, oh, he was known for, chopping his wife and child up into little bits with an axe, and then he killed himself. And then he just goes, "No, Mr. Torrance, you are the caretaker. You've always been the caretaker." And that entire scene, I literally had chills running down my spine when I watched The Shining last Halloween, because that entire conversation that they have in the bathroom, that is lifted word for word from this book. And I just love that, because Stanley Kubrick, even though he does like to have he does like to go his own way, and he's his own particular perfectionist, I do feel like he's fantastic at giving other creators their due, especially when something that he's written isn't working. And I really do like that about him. But Stephen King very famously hated the adaptation of his book because there was no real characterization in his stories. It was often, just left up to the reader's interpretation. And a lot of people have criticised actors like Shelley Duvall and the casting of Wendy Torrance because she just kind of breaks down into an emotional mess at the first sign of trouble. But in a way, I kind of get it when you see the production behind the movie, because Stanley Kubrick is an absolute menace. He literally, harassed her every single chance he got. He would whisper things in actors' ears. Like, there was a famous example in the film Eyes Wide Shut involving the real-life couple at the time, Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise, where he would literally whisper things in the actor's ear to really get them to feel on edge and to feel like they don't trust each other. And while that's a horrible move, it worked because it actually, resold the performances that these actors were giving about these 2 lovers who literally were on the rocks and not really knowing whether they should trust each other. So it does work, but part of me feels like it kind of went a bit too far with Shelley Duvall, where she actually just became such an emotional mess that she literally just would break down, and she literally looked like she was about to faint any given second. Like, it's really horrible to watch, whereas the Wendy Torrance in this, she's a much more, layered, a much more nuanced character. She has a family who are also struggling with addiction. Jack Torrance, by the way, is suffering with alcoholism. He suffered with it during his job as a university teacher at the time, and he was also head of the electoral debate. And one of the candidates who he said couldn't run for candidacy, even if he tried and he trained and he trained and he trained. And this particular student didn't take it very well, to the point where he literally, I think he was the one who slashed his tyres. It's been a while since I've read this. But there was an incident involving his car where Jack Torrance just assaults the kid. He punches him in the face, and because he's so angry, and he ends up getting fired from his job at this university. And that just sends him into a spiral where he starts to drink heavily. He starts, come home late. And whenever he is getting creative, he always finds his work being kind of, used as a canvas for Danny's mark making. There's a scene where he's writing a play and he has worked very hard on it, and then he comes back into his office one day and he sees that the entire pages of his manuscript have just been, drawn over, but given these great big crayon markers. And instead of actually just taking Danny aside and saying, "Don't do that, this is something that I worked hard on," because he's in a very slightly drunken state, he decides to take his child, who is literally a baby at this point, and he breaks his arm. And this is a horrible scene for obvious reasons, but the fact that Wendy still stays with him after this, it kind of makes me think, oh, you're so dumb, Wendy. Like, why don't you just leave? I mean, he literally showed that he doesn't give a damn about his child in this drunken state, but then you realise that he does. He does care about his child. He does care about Danny. It's just that the demonic force of alcoholism, which is a very demonic force, according to Stephen King, it's very kind of it's very kind of almost all-consuming. It really controls him in various different ways. And I also forgot to mention that Danny has a very special gift. He can actually read people's minds and pick up little fragments of information, or see the future in some cases as well. He can even, go inside people's heads and actually see what they're thinking, and hear what they're actually thinking in their heads. So it's very interesting, and he has had various instances where he has picked up on things that characters have said without saying them and things like that. But he finds a bit of a companion in or a bit of a kinship with the one of the caretakers, one of the cooks, Dick Halloran, and he basically shows him all these different things. And there's a couple of things that he hears people saying that children aren't meant to hear. So when he has those conversations with Dick Halloran, like there's even a very awkward bit of innuendo that's not at all subtle. He even mentions this to Dick, and Dick literally gets uncomfortable. Like, oh, how do I explain this to a child? There's a lot of very awkward moments like that in this book, but it works because it shows that Stephen King gets that this is a child picking up these things, and he can't help it. He has a special ability. He doesn't know where it's come from. He just knows that it is, and he basically talks to a guy called Tony, who is later revealed to be a much older version of Danny, in the book at least. And this book is very atmospheric. Yeah, there are some scenes that, if you actually think about it for a few seconds, it is kind of goofy, like the idea of the fireman's hose coming to life and acting like a snake, and chasing Danny, or the hedge animals in the hedge maze, coming to life and doing things. But the very clever thing about Stephen King is he doesn't show you the animals actually moving. He shows you little images or little moments where the eye could be tricked into thinking that something moved. And the way he writes it, he really makes it compelling, and he really kind of adds this level of the unreliable narrator to the entirety of the book, making things go in a certain direction where you think, oh, do I even trust my own eyes, or do I even trust my own senses because of what's going on in this hotel? And I even referred at one point that the demon alcohol is very strong in Jack. Later on in the story, that takes on a much more literal connotation, because he gets to talking with Lloyd, who gives him a bourbon, or a Scotch or a whiskey, and he drinks it, and it's slightly darker than the original brand. And that's pretty dark. And it's even hinted at that, the hotel has literally created a manifestation of its own substance so that it can actually possess him very slowly, or using his vices, which is alcoholism, as a way of controlling him. And of course, that's kind of what alcohol does, where it kind of feels like it's, instead of you taking on your own agency, it's like all the agency has been drained out of you through the use of the substance, or the overindulgence of the substance. So it's actually a very good parallel to how alcoholism and how addiction works, full stop. And it's very intelligently done. Honestly, Stephen King really does a really good job of really kind of depicting addiction, but he doesn't portray it as he portrays it as a monster, but he doesn't portray the people doing it as a monster. Yes, he does still go crazy at one point, and he does hunt down his family with a croquet mallet in the case of the book, but in the film it's a fireman's axe. But he still loves his family, and he still has this degree of, he is possessed, he is being controlled by the hotel, and there's this really wonderful moment, which, if you've seen the Doctor Sleep film adaptation, which is the sequel to The Shining, there's a scene, spoilers for that by the way, spoilers for the film version of Doctor Sleep. In that version, Danny gets possessed by the hotel, and he tries to stalk Abra, the girl who has the Shining, this girl who has the Shining, through the hotel with the axe, but he basically corners her at one point, and she tries to basically appeal to his more human side and tries to say, look, you can't let this thing control you. And it's the same thing with Danny in The Shining, where he tries to say to his dad, look, you can't let this thing control you, I'm your son, I love you, and things like that. And thankfully Jack manages to fight it off, whereas in the original, in the film version, he's kind of just portrayed as very kind of unhinged from the very beginning. There's a very human quality to Jack in this particular film adaptation, which is, if I was to do a remake of this film, I'd probably cast someone like David Harbour, who plays Sheriff Hooper in Stranger Things. He's a fantastic actor, and he's, of course, the character of Sheriff Hooper is a fantastic character. But he's a character who is very kind of troubled and very damaged and dealing with a lot of trauma. And the trauma in Jack Torrance's case is that he basically had a father who was a drunk, and he used to cane his children. He used to beat them several times a day. And there's this wonderful image of fire being used, where he's throwing a hornet's nest into a fiery furnace, and he basically says, fire consumes everything, or something along those lines. And I think that's such a great moment. It's a great use of foreshadowing as well, because it basically tells you what's going to... It basically sets up at the very end what's going to happen at the very end with the hotel. So, this book is fantastic. It's very well written, and I just really love the characters. I mean, they're much more better portrayed than they are in the... It's much more dramatic, and it's much more left to your interpretation in the film, whereas in the book, they do give you pages and pages of backstory. Like, for example, Wendy also had a father who had alcoholism, severe alcoholism, and his mother was very controlling. Her mother was very bossy. Her mother was very kind of, oh, don't marry someone like that, Wendy. You're only going to regret it if you do. And she's worried, instead of becoming like a father, she's worried that she's going to become like a mother, like this controlling, very kind of bossy, very kind of, shrug your shoulders, devil may care kind of character. And she doesn't want to be too controlled because she loves her husband still, even though he does this terrible thing to her child. She still loves him, and I love the fact that there is still that love, and it's not seedy. It's not it's not left up to interpretation where people could assume the worst of this person, like in the fan theories of the film version. A lot of people have made fan theories that Danny Torrance was molested by Jack, and I thought, my God, do we always have to jump on the the dad molests the child fan theory a lot in these films, where it's left to your interpretation? Because in the book, Jack really loves Danny, and he really cares about Danny as his son, and it kind of gives this negative stereotype that if a man overly loves his child, he immediately is a creeper or someone who is a bit of a pervert. And it really kind of creates this very negative aspect to it. And even though it might not be intentionally done so, because of course it's a story, it does kind of leave this very kind of negative it does leave this very negative connotation or this negative implication. And I just want to say to fan theories, stop doing that, because it really kind of adds a very kind of bad... It gives very bad vibes, kind of. And but this book is fantastic. I absolutely love the characterization. I love how every character has their own version of how they tell these stories. With Danny's chapters, his chapters are much more written in a much more simplistic style. He has a very kind of he has both a very simplistic tone of voice, but he has this very imaginative way of looking at things. So when you do see the hedge maze scene with the hedge animals, you really do get this impression that, this guy clearly is this guy clearly is using his imagination, or letting his imagination take its toll on him. And it's very well done, and it really shows that Stephen King knows how to do character. He knows how to write characters exceptionally well. And the book is just a very breathtaking read because it's done from the heart. This is Stephen King's more personal novel, I feel like. And when he does his more personal novels, it really does come across as more powerful. And this isn't the only one that feels like it lives a lot from his own life. The novel Pet Sematary is a perfect example. It's one of my favourite Stephen King novels, but it's one of the more perfect examples of showing a writer at his most vulnerable. One of his greatest fears, he said, since becoming a father, is losing his children, and that kind of is put into good effect in the novel Pet Sematary. If you've read the novel Pet Sematary, or if you've seen the 1989 film adaptation, you'll know exactly what I mean by that, and you'll know what he's getting at when he says, he's frightened of losing his children before himself. So yeah, I like it when he does the more personal stories, but also I like the fact that even in novels like Misery, he really does put a lot of his own anxieties about how his fans react to his work, and he ended up creating a very interesting commentary on fan culture before fan culture became a thing. And I just love that about Stephen King. He's able to tap into these things, and he's able to read. That's why I think he's a genius with characterization, because he just gets how people tick. And the fact that, he's able to tap into all these different scenarios, tap into all these different characters in all these different walks of life, really shows that he's a very, he's a very lived in, he's a very experienced person, and he's seen every aspect of life from its very, from its much more light-hearted and chirpy and absolutely wondrous aspects of humanity to the darker side of humanity, where it becomes more predatory, where it becomes more, every man for himself kind of attitude. And that's a fantastic writer. And I think a lot of people, very sadly, just because he's a horror writer, and horror gets this very horrible taboo of being smutty, being, junk food, basically, where it's not good for you, but it will provide some enjoyment. And to me, that's not the case. I think that kind of became the norm after the Friday the 13th film series, where it just basically focused. And I love the Friday the 13th film series. That's my trash. I absolutely love it. It's basically my version of the Fast and the Furious, or my version of, something like Rambo, where it's total cheese, or something like Commando, or anything with Arnold Schwarzenegger in it. You really do get this sense that, it's total rubbish, it's total nonsense, and it's complete and utter fantasy, but I just love it, and I just think it's hilarious, and it's absolutely, sometimes the kills are very brutal, but I just find it absolutely, it's complete junk food, but I totally, I'm totally here for it, but I also kind of hate it because it created this very negative aspect to horror, that, it's basically junk food, and it's very smutty and all over the place. But horror is a very sophisticated medium. If you look at the works of Edgar Allan Poe, or even to authors like Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein and a novel called The Last Man, she basically created an entire genre that was entirely her own. Like, most novelists didn't write these kinds of stories, where it was basically talking about the cautionary areas of using science, the use of science as a means to quicken progress, as opposed to actually stopping, thinking about what sort of implications it's going to create, and then thinking about the long-term consequences of it. Instead of doing that, they jump the gun and say, well, okay, we're going to create this monster, and he's going to be, he's going to be the cure of death, and things like that. Whereas death can't be cured. Death is a force of nature, it's not a disease. And to me, that's something that really is beautifully done in the novel Frankenstein. But Mary Shelley did that. She created an entire genre, and she used her own personal pain to frame the story of Frankenstein. I mean, she lost her baby when she was 18 years old. She basically was in a situation where she was away from her family, she was away from the life that she knew. Her husband was at sea, and he tragically died. Percy Shelley, the poet Percy Shelley, and she was left to look after a child, and her child very sadly passed away of a sickness which wasn't foreseen. And it devastated her. She absolutely was in an absolute state of absolute grief. And knowing a few mothers, being related to you know, two mothers now, and being related, having an extended family of mothers and mothers to be, I know that's an incredible pain that is completely unimaginable unless you're a parent or you are related to, you know, or unless you have, you know, you're an uncle or an aunt, you kind of don't know what it's like to kind of go through that pain of losing a child. So that really was a very powerful thing. But she used that pain, she used that trauma to create this incredible masterpiece of science fiction, and really kind of, you know, just show people that, look, women can be just as hard hitting as men can, and things like that, and really kind of giving the finger to the establishment and saying, you know, F you guys, I'm going to go off and I'm going to write my stories. And that paved the way for, you know, the likes of Emily Bronte, Charlotte Bronte, the Bronte sisters, and Jane Austen. So she actually paved the way for a lot of women writers to really kind of, you know, branch out and say, look, we don't have to be caged. We can go out and, you know, we can tell our own stories. We can use our own experiences to reframe these interesting genres. And she created the first post-apocalyptic story with The Last Man. And that led to Stephen King's The Stand and various other stories about, you know, mankind on the brink of collapse and only a few survivors coming out of it unscathed, but having to survive in the wilds of nature and things like that, and the consequences of their actions. So yeah, that's my review for The Shining, and I will be doing another review of a book because it's Halloween and I really do want to focus on more literature. The next video I'm going to do today, sorry I haven't posted any videos yesterday, I just had a lot going on, so I decided to basically post no videos. I did post one, I think, but I'm going to be posting more whimsical and interesting musings reviews for novels throughout the month of Halloween. Yes, I will be doing a few films, like I've got a review for The Fog coming up, which I'm really looking forward to, John Carpenter's The Fog, and I'm really excited because that was my Halloween. That was the film that kind of got me introduced into John Carpenter's world, and of course I watched The Thing, and it totally changed my life. Everything about John Carpenter's later films after Halloween really are just exceptional. Except of course films like Ghosts of Mars and things like that. But yeah, I really do like his work, and I really do want to go more in the direction of, you know, his more underrated stuff as opposed to Halloween. I will be talking about Halloween though, and at some point, but not right now. So yeah, that's my review for Stephen King's The Shining, and it's a fantastic book. It's a 5-star read for me. I think this book's a masterpiece, and if you want to get yourself into the Halloween mood, you want to snuggle up in front of the central heating or your warm fire or whatever, and basically have a nice cup of hot chocolate or a nice cup of tea, and you want to, you know, get cozy and you want to snuggle up with a good book, I would recommend reading Stephen King's The Shining. It's a fantastic fireplace read. It's an absolute, you know, atmospheric masterpiece, but it's a wonderful examination on trauma, on alcoholism, and basically on addiction, full stop. And it's also a great, you know, commentary on family and how dysfunctional families can still thrive and still be lovable, even though there are a lot of problems in their lives. And of course, it's about supernatural hotels and ghosts haunting people as well. So if you like that, it's definitely worth picking this book up. But Stephen King is a master, and I just think his books are now starting to get more recognition now. But back then, he was just considered the horror writer, and that was just considered taboo. Like, oh, he's a pulp writer, he's not meant to be taken seriously. But again, like Mary Shelley, Stephen King pretty much, you know, said, hold my beer, and showed the world what he could do. And that's just amazing. It's very inspiring to me. So I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day. This has been Josh with Whimsical and Interesting Musings, a show about me bringing you whimsical and interesting musings every day, all year round. Take care. See you all later. Bye.